Did you know that the Kaaba actually used to be a rectangle? You see, in the year 605, just 5 years before Muhammad ﷺ received revelation, a huge torrent of water and rain flooded the Meccan valley, destroying the walls of the Kaaba, leaving it in ruins. Eventually, the Quraysh decided to take down the remaining walls, leaving only the foundation of the Kaaba itself, which Ibrahim had laid. And even though the Quraysh were pagans at the time, the chieftains recognized that the Kaaba was something sacred, and so they made a vow to rebuild it only with the finest materials they could find and fund it only with halal income. And just then news came that a Byzantine ship had crashed along the shores of Jeddah, only a 2 days journey away. At the time, the Byzantines were allies with the Christians of Aksum, the empire where Najashi was from, and they had sent a ship full of expensive marble and timber along with craftsmen trained in the Byzantine palaces. Their mission was to build a large church for the king of Aksum, but when a storm hit the ship, the crew were shipwrecked, and now they needed to sell their materials to find a way back home. The Quraysh took advantage of this opportunity and hired one of the craftsmen to help rebuild the Kaaba using the Byzantine wood and stone. But there was just one problem. The Quraysh were unable to come up with enough halal money to fund the full rebuilding of the Kaaba, and so they decided to build part of it and complete the rest later. And so they started with the corner of the black stone and the Yemeni corner, building the walls to the other two corners until the Kaaba eventually took the shape of a square. And then to mark the remaining unfinished part of the Kaaba, they built a low stone wall which today takes the shape of the Hatim. That area within the Hatim is the Kaaba. And this is why when you do tawaf around the Kaaba, you also have to do it around the Hatim. The Prophet ﷺ actually wanted to rebuild the Kaaba to make it a rectangle again, but he was afraid that it would create doubts in the hearts of the people of Mecca who had only recently converted to Islam. And so it stayed a cube ever since. Except that's not entirely true. You see, after the death of the first Umayyad Caliph in 680, the caliphate was thrown into a succession crisis. On one side, the caliph's son Yazid I claimed the caliphate from his capital city in Damascus. On the other side, a Sahabi by the name of Abdullah ibn Zubayr claimed the caliphate from Mecca. At first, both sides tried to resolve the situation through negotiations, but a stalemate was met, and eventually both sides instigated a war. Yazid sent an army to take control of the Haramain Sharifain in 683, putting Mecca under siege. The siege was then eventually lifted after news of Yazid's death arrived, and the army quickly retreated back to Damascus. But at some point during that siege, the Kaaba caught fire and was severely damaged to the point that it needed to be rebuilt from scratch. Abdullah ibn Zubayr, knowing the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ and his desire to rebuild the Kaaba in the original shape of Ibrahim's foundation, took it upon himself and built it in the shape of a rectangle. There the Kaaba stayed for 9 years, remaining in its full size, a rectangle without the Hatim. But this too would not last. The war was still raging on, and now things had gotten even more complicated. Two new groups had appeared, splitting the caliphate even further. One group was the Khawarij, who now controlled the deserts of Arabia, and the other group was under the leadership of Mukhtar al-Thaqafi, who took control of Iraq, claiming that the Mahdi had already arrived and that he knew who it was. Eventually, Yazid's successor, Abdul Malik ibn Marwan, managed to secure Iraq under his control, and then he sent one of his generals, Hajjaj ibn Yusuf, to head south and confront Ibn Zubayr's army. It was now 692, and once again Mecca was put under siege. To avoid bloodshed in Mecca, Abdul Malik ibn Marwan ordered Hajjaj not to enter the city, but just to cut it off from all supplies and try and force Ibn Zubayr to leave. The siege lasted for 7 months, and at some point catapults were used to destroy infrastructure within the city. Eventually, one of the catapults ended up hitting the Kaaba once again, requiring it to be rebuilt. Eventually, most of the people of Mecca fled, and Hajjaj was able to take the city, and Ibn Zubayr was then executed. The civil war was now over, and Hajjaj ibn Yusuf managed to defeat the remaining Khawarij in the deserts of Arabia, and the caliphate was now united once more under Abdul Malik ibn Marwan. When Abdul Malik then heard about what Ibn Zubayr had done to the Kaaba, he was shocked. Unaware that Ibrahim had originally built the Kaaba as a rectangle, he immediately ordered the reconstruction of the Kaaba, making it a cube once more. Only after it was finished did he learn the truth. He was then told the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ and felt deep regret, saying, I wish I had left Ibn Zubair's work there. But that leaves just one question unanswered. If he and the caliphs after him knew that the Prophet ﷺ had wanted to revert the Kaaba back to a rectangle, why didn't they? Well, another caliph by the name of Harun al-Rashid proposed this idea. He then went to one of the great scholars of his time, Malik ibn Anas, for advice. Malik ibn Anas, however, didn't like the idea. He was afraid that the kings in the future would build and rebuild the Kaaba, playing with it as if it was their own toy. In the eyes of the people, it would lose its sanctity. And ever since then, the Kaaba has remained a square with a hatim marking the missing walls. And what many people didn't realize is that this is actually a huge blessing. Many years ago, the Kaaba used to be open to the public, but because there are now so many Muslims doing Hajj, they have to keep the Kaaba closed most of the time to prevent overcrowding. But because that part of the Kaaba is still open, you can pray inside of the Kaaba just by being within the hatim. It is the Kaaba after all, just without a roof and walls. Like and subscribe for more Muslim facts.